On the line with us right now, he is the Secretary of State for the state of Alabama. We want to say good afternoon to Secretary John Merrill. Good afternoon, Secretary Merrill.
John, how are you?
Very well, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Rhode Island is moving into some uncharted waters where they want to start to make it state law on certain voting provisions. And from what I understand, in the state of Alabama, you run very secure, fair elections and have certain election laws that make sense.
John, you're very kind. I will tell you that we are both honored and delighted to be recognized for the great work we've done in election integrity over the last 6 years, 2 months, and 11 days. I've had the privilege to serve as Alabama Secretary of State, and everything that we've done since I've been the Secretary has been designed to make it easy to vote and hard to cheat in our state. And we have worked extraordinarily hard to ensure that each and every eligible U.S. citizen as a resident of Alabama is registered to vote and has a photo ID. And look, since January the 19th, 2015, we've registered 1,818,555 new voters. We now have a state record 3,585,688 registered voters. 96% of all eligible African Americans in our state are registered to vote. 91% of all eligible whites are registered to vote, and 94% of all eligible Alabamians are registered to vote. And I don't know how many of your listeners are familiar with college athletics, but when we produce that kind of work in our state, we say roll tide.
That is exactly right, Mr. Secretary. Could you touch on, is ballot harvesting, is that allowed in the state of Alabama?
It is not allowed in our state, nor do we encourage it in any state in the union, because it is obviously an attempt to defraud and introduce nefarious activities into the elections process. And so we fight hard against that effort, not just in Alabama, but wherever we see it being introduced in the nation.
And that's one of the problems in Rhode Island, where the campaigns are allowed to ballot harvest. For those that don't understand, they allow campaign workers to go out, register people to vote, and then actually collect their mail ballot from them. And Mr. Secretary, as you can imagine, that leads to, as you say, nefarious activity where there are campaigns where they pay people by the vote. So if you go out and they'll pay you $15 a ballot, so then you go out and you get 1,000 ballots, what have you. You can see where then people start to skirt the law and it becomes like a cottage industry.
Absolutely it is. You just described it perfectly, which is one of the reasons that we're opposed to it. We believe in one person, one vote. We don't believe that one person should be able to gather additional votes from people, mark their ballots, or pay those individuals, give them a fifth of whiskey, give them a six-pack of beer, give them a carton of cigarettes or a carton of Red Man, give them $20 or whatever it happens to be in order to get that person to vote on their behalf. That's not acceptable, and it's not the way that our founding fathers intended for it to happen.
Folks, we're speaking with Secretary of State of Alabama. It's John Merrill. Mr. Secretary, also, where is your state regarding mail ballots? Now, Rhode Island, it's always been a problem, and now they've moved into, they want to make it law that it doesn't even have to be notarized. So, in essence, an X also can serve as a signature. Many of these mail ballot applications that went out and mail ballots that came in, there's really no real legitimate way to figure out and tell whether or not these are, in fact, legitimate mail ballots.
You are correct, John, and that's one of the reasons that we saw problems in Pennsylvania, we saw problems in Michigan, we saw problems in Wisconsin, we saw problems in Georgia. And in our state, we use an absentee process that first requires an application where the voter has to indicate a reason why he or she is actually voting absentee. It has to qualify for one of those purposes. After that's done, then when they submit their and they have to submit a valid copy of their photo ID with that application. When they submit their ballot, then the affidavit envelope, the excuses, are also having to be checked. And then at that point, when it's received, that ballot had to be notarized, or two witnesses had to say they knew who the voter was when they submitted the ballot.
Hmm. Now, another problem that we've had in Rhode Island are these drop boxes. Now, it's my understanding they were actually implemented to...
But John, before we continue
Go
with
ahead.
drop boxes,
Yes.
friend, let me share something else with you, because there's some listeners out there in Newport and Providence or somewhere that's listening to us, and they're saying, you know, I hear what that boy's saying, but one of the things that concerns me is how that's keeping people from voting. Well, what your listeners may not be aware of is that I talked about our record number of voter registration and how it empirically has designated that Alabama has led the nation in that regard in the last 6 years and 2 months and 11 days. But your listeners also need to know in that same period of time, we've broken every record in the history of the state for voter participation with our photo ID requirements and these other things that I've introduced to you that make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. So empirically, we can prove that it's not a deterrent to participation and that our numbers continue to increase on participation across the board. So I want to make sure that your folks know that as well.
I appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. What about, speaking of that, is anyone allowed to register to vote? In Rhode Island, they don't have a record that anyone is turned away. Basically, anyone that signs up to vote, whether they're documented, undocumented, could live in another state, no one is turned away from registering to vote.
Problem, my friend. Let me tell you why it's a problem, okay? Now, in Alabama, and I said this just a minute ago when I told you about our numbers, but if you want to be a registered voter in Alabama, first of all, you got to be a citizen of the United States. Then you have to be a resident of Alabama, where you live. And then you have to reside within the jurisdiction where you're participating in the electoral process. Now, my question is, in Rhode Island, that maybe y'all prefer this. Maybe you like to have the people that are in the Rotary Club elect the president of the Exchange Club. Maybe in Rhode Island, y'all like to have the people that attend the Catholic Church determine who the minister's going to be in the Protestant church. In Rhode Island, maybe y'all like to determine who's going to be the mayor of Newport, determined by the people that live in Providence. But in Alabama, we don't like that. We like our people making our decisions about our people. And I don't know how you can get effective government unless you have people that are representing you, that live in your area, that understand what your needs are.
Yep. No, I agree with you, Mr. Secretary. Let me also ask you this, and again, folks, we're speaking with Secretary John Merrill. He's Secretary of State for the state of Alabama. By the way, that is considered one of the finest as far as how they conduct their elections. Mr. Secretary, on the form that someone has to fill out, it does say if this is incorrect, by penalty, you could be penalized penalty of perjury if you fill this out. However, in the last 25 years, no one has ever been prosecuted for perjury in filling out the registration to vote. Does the state of Alabama, have you ever gone after someone for fraudulent voting?
Absolutely, John. Since I've been the secretary, we've had 6 convictions on voter fraud.
Wow.
We've had 3 elections overturned. We've led the nation in election integrity. And, John, that's just one of the reasons why in the 2020 election cycle, Alabama was recognized as the premier state in the union for election security and integrity. And we take a lot of pride in that because, John, we want everybody to vote, but just one time. And we want everybody that's eligible to vote to be registered and then cast their ballot for the candidate of their choice. And we don't think it's too much to make sure that you are properly registered after we determine whether or not you're a citizen and a resident of the state.
How are the voting rolls in the state of Alabama? Now, in Rhode Island, according to the census, there should be 545,000 registered voters on the voting rolls. But however, there's 800,000 people on the voting rolls. It's bloated by close to or over 300,000. How are the Alabama voting rolls?
John, that's another problem, my friend. Now, what I didn't share with you, I told you about our record numbers of registered folks to vote. But what I didn't tell you was that in that same period of time, for 6 years, 2 months, and 11 days, we've removed more than 1.3 million people from the voter rolls.
Holy
and
cow.
we removed those people because because they've moved away, they've passed away, or they've been put away. And whenever that happens, they need to come off the voter rolls.
Yep.
The basic foundational principle for success